Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today we have another video in our Hammock Camping 101 series. And today we're going to look at how to properly hang your hammock. When it comes to hanging your hammock, it's all about personal choice and what is going to work best for you. But the factors involved in hanging your hammock are all the same. And that's what this video is going to focus on today, is looking at those three factors and how you can get the best hang when you're out in the backcountry. The first factor you need to consider is the distance between your trees, and this will depend on the length of your hammock. So I have an 11-foot hammock, and I typically look for trees anywhere between 15 to 20 feet apart, depending on the type of suspensions that I have. But that's the first thing when I come into a campsite, is I start eyeballing the distance between the trees and where I could even possibly hang a hammock. So again, I'm looking for anywhere between 15 and 20 feet. And a trick that I use is to measure that distance is my stride. So I'll stand at one of the trees and then I'll see how many strides it is between each tree. And for me, a stride is about a yard, which is 3 feet. And that'll give me a good approximate distance of my trees that I am looking for. So again, when you're looking for trees, obviously you don't want to hang from a dead tree, and you don't want a dead tree kind of in your path that could potentially fall on you in the middle of the night. So that's something to consider about your trees, as well as the thickness of your trees, because your straps are only going to be so long around. So you also want to look at the tree's thickness and how much strap you have to actually go around the tree. So that's the first thing I do. When I walk into camp, I look at the trees, I look for any dead trees, the live trees, the thickness of the trees, and then I look at the distance between the trees to see what is potentially the best spot for me to hang my hammock. The second factor you'll need to consider is how high up on the tree that you're going to hang your straps. And this will be directly dependent on the distance between your trees. So typically, the farther away the trees are from each other, the higher the strap needs to be on the tree. Like I said earlier, I look for trees to be about 15 to 20 feet apart, and I start kind of at eye level when I'm hanging my straps, or at my head. So somewhere around 6 feet high is what I am looking for initially to hang the straps around my tree. But again, this will be very dependent upon the distance between my trees. Because if I'm above 20 feet, or if my distance between my trees is longer than 20 feet, then I'll probably need to go 7 feet or even more, depending on that distance, to get the proper hang that I'm looking for. The third factor you need to consider is the length of your suspension. So once you have the suspension around the trees, next you hook it up or secure it to the end of your continuous loop on your hammock. And that distance from your continuous loop to the trees is important. It's going to create a certain angle on it. And the tighter or shorter that suspension is, the tighter your hammock is going to be. And the longer or looser that suspension is, the lower your hammock is going to be, and give you more of that kind of banana boat shape effect. So somewhere in between is what you're looking for, is what's going to work best for you. So you'll need to play around with the length of that suspension as you are tightening it up and loosening it around the tree. Now that you've found your trees and have your suspension wrapped around and your hammock secured, how do you know? How do you know whether or not you have a good hang or not? Well, you got to sit in your hammock, figure it out, right? And so once you sit in your hammock or lay in your hammock, there's 3 things that I look for to see if it is a proper hang for me. The first being, I look at my ridge line. I know not all hammocks have ridge line, but I do recommend one. I know it helps me as I'm kind of tightening my straps, the length. This tightness here is a good indicator for how tight those straps need to be. So the first thing I look for is, am I able to bend my ridge line? And to me, this right here, you see this bend, that's a good tension. If the straps were any shorter, then that tension would be really tight and I wouldn't be able to bend it at all. And that's a really, really tight hammock. If the suspension was longer, then this would be kind of drooping down almost and there'd be no tension on it at all. So your ridge line is a good indicator of how tight your hammock is. So again, for me, a sweet spot is being able to bend it between my two fingers a little bit, not too much, to see what is a good tightness for me. So that's the first thing that I look for. The second thing that I look for is the angle of the suspension. And what they say as kind of a rule of thumb is a 30-degree angle. Well, how do you know what a 30-degree angle? Well, a tip that I've learned is kind of, turn your hand into the shape of a gun. And that line there is approximately a 30-degree angle. So what I'll do is take it and see if my thumb and my finger are creating that. Because again, if it's too tight, it's going to be really flat. If it's way too loose, then it's going to be, you'll see the angle like that. But when you get that 30-degree angle, it'll approximately fit on there. And that's another way that I determine whether I feel like I'm getting a good hang on my hammock or not. The third thing I look for is, actually sitting and laying in my hammock and seeing how it feels. So when I sit in my hammock, I like to have my feet flat on the ground. But again, that's my preference. You can sit up high or you can sit down low and want to come out with a squat. But I like having my feet flat against the ground as if I'm sitting in a chair. And that's probably 30 inches is what works best for me. And then, I just lay in my hammock. All right. So asymmetrical, I'm laying at an angle. And what I'm looking for is how tight is the hammock underneath my leg. Because if you see, if I lay straight on like this, you can see there's a gap underneath and it's really, really tight. And that's what happens when you have a tight hammock, is you have that gap underneath. And over time and over the night, that will create a lot of pressure and tension on your legs, and your legs will begin to ache. So I'm looking for that same thing when I'm laying flat, is how tight is that fabric underneath my legs? Is there a gap? Am I feeling any type of tension in my legs? That's important for me. And then you just kind of get used to what feels best for you, whether it's too tight or too loose. And that's when you begin to play with your straps on the trees. Right? Once you find your two trees, that you're kind of set with that, and that's what you need to work with. But after that, what I'll typically do if I don't like what I'm looking at, maybe if I'm sitting up too high, then I'll go and I'll lower the straps on my trees. Or maybe I'm sitting down too low and I'm, my butt's all the way on the ground. I got to sit up with a squat. Well, then I'll raise the straps on my trees. Or if my hammock is too tight, if I can't even bend it, then I need to loosen up my straps, right? And then you have to loosen up your straps, then you may have to raise them a little bit. So there's going to be this, give and take as you are playing around with the straps on your tree. And that's why I say there is a learning curve to hammock camping. But that is how I determine whether or not I have a good feel. Is I look at my ridge line, what's the tension like? I look at my straps. Do I have that 30-degree angle? And then I just lay in my hammock. I sit in my hammock and see if that's comfortable and that works for me. And then I'll adjust accordingly until I get that proper fit that works best for me. Well, I figure rather than just telling you how to properly hang a hammock, I would come out here to one of the local trails in my town and let's look for a good spot where I can hang a hammock and I can walk through kind of my mindset of the trees I'm looking for and the steps I go to fine tune my hammock. So let's go find some good trees. All right, I think I found the two set of trees that I want to hang my hammock from. We've got this tree right here, and then that tree right there. But this looks like it's gonna work, just eyeballing it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is step it off and see what the actual distance is between these two trees. First thing I wanna do is stride out the distance between the trees and get kind of an approximate distance of what I'm dealing with. So I start here at the base of the first one, and then I just do my strides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 6 strides, a little bit over 18 feet it looks like. So yeah, that's gonna work. That's typically the distance I like. All right, the next thing I'm gonna do is get the straps set up. All right, so you have your suspension that you're gonna use. Mine is the whoopee sling. So I have my Kevlar strap. Like I said, my whoopee slings, I like to have a little bit further than 18 feet, so I might have to double up on this one. But I'm about 6 foot, so I tend to like to start my height right there. So I hook it around my little Dutch carabiner and tighten that up, just like that. Let's go to the other side. Check my height there. So I'll hang it a little over 6 feet tall. Strap that around. You can see I have a long suspension here with the strap and the whoopee sling itself. That's generally why with the whoopee sling you need your trees to be a little further apart. So I'm anticipating that I'm going to have to, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it around the tree a couple times. That, and then I'm going to slide it in my Dutch, and then boom. Hopefully with one side tightened up, that will work just fine. All right, now let's get the hammock. So my hammock is in what they call a double end stuff sack, which means it has 2 openings on the side. And this lets you hang it without it dragging on the ground. So what I'll do is I'll just hook my continuous loop up to my little Dutch hook, like that. And then I will open up one side of my hammock bag, and then I'll pull it out and walk it to the other end. And then I'm just going to tighten up the whoopies. Right. So tighten this, squeeze that berry, and that should do well. All right, let's give it a try. I'm a little lower than I want to be on the hammock. My tension seems pretty good. So what that probably means is the length of my straps, of my suspension straps, is probably okay, but the height on the tree probably needs to be a little bit higher than what it is. So let me reset that. So here you can see with my Kevlar strap, I had to wrap it around it like 3 times, and then I secured it in with my Dutch beaner there. And then I hooked it up to my little Dutch hook to the end of my continuous loop. And then I did the same thing on the other side, about the same height as well. Now that I've raised my straps higher on each side of the tree, let's give it another test. See how this is really stretchy. My feet are flat, like it. My tension, you can see that I can bend it a little bit. So to me, this would suffice. The final test would be laying in it. Laying at an angle, and yeah, that's gonna work out just fine. Doesn't feel too tight underneath. Feels like I can lay flat pretty well. So this is a pretty good hang. But you can see I have to play around with the different factors. So the distance of my trees, once I have that 18 feet set in, you know, I'm locked in to what that is. And then based on the straps that I have, will depend on how many times I might have to loop it around. So if I'm using the whoopee slings, I know that my trees need to be farther apart. And if they're not farther apart, I know I need to wrap that strap around a couple times to make it work. The daisy chains and the cinch buckle will be a little more accommodating in terms of the length of your trees. So that's something that's good to know when you're trying to hang your hammock. So one thing to keep in mind as you are hammock camping, you know, out there in the backcountry, is that you're not going to find a perfect setup. You're not going to find a perfect set of trees that are the perfect distance apart with the perfect ground underneath where you can easily walk. You know, typically you're in a forest, you're in woods, so there's other trees and there's bushes and there's undergrowth, and all that you still have to consider. Like even the spot I'm in now, I wouldn't have picked it for a trip simply because I have a tree here that would be in the way of my tarp. It's not in the way of my hammock. I can easily hang a hammock here, but it would have gotten in the way of me pitching down my tarp. So that'll be another video that I'll go through, is hanging your tarp, how to hang it, and some things that you'll need to consider for that as well. But since today I'll just only hang in my hammock, and you know, I wanted to make the point that you're not going to have the perfect situation. You're not going to have the perfect environment for your hammock, which is why when you get to camp, you're going to have to fiddle around a little bit based on your hammock, based on your straps, on your trees, your given environment, right? You're going to have to play around, and sometimes you just got to make things work. You're not always going to get the perfect hang, but hopefully the things that we've talked about in this video, you know, the distance between your trees, how high you hang your strap on your trees, as well as the length of the suspension of your straps, is going to help you figure out how you can dial in to whatever your given situation is. At least now you know what those variables are, so you can get the best hang in the situation that you're in.